This HOA Karen rolled her $60K BMW straight into my garage like it was her personal VIP bay, then hit me with a $200 fine for security violation because the door stayed cracked overnight. I limp home after wiring a skyscraper for 12 brutal hours, boots caked in dust, and there's Linda Whitmore's pearl white beast camped over my torque wrenches, her vanilla air freshener choking my diesel fumes, alarm chirping like a smug rooster. I tell her to move. She flips a laminated emergency protocol and sneers, "Learn to share the village, peasant." So I grabbed my garage remote, hit that button, and listened to her BMW get locked inside my garage. Then I booked a flight to Hawaii for 2 weeks. When I got back, Linda was crying in my voicemail about legal consequences, while the whole neighborhood watched her world crumble. Before I reveal how a simple garage door button and a perfectly timed vacation destroyed her entire empire, confess, who's the pint-sized dictator that tried to bury you? Name your town below. I'm still laughing at what happened next. Let me back up and introduce myself properly. I'm Garrett Hutchins, 48 years old, union electrician who spends his days crawling through office building ceilings making sure rich people's computers stay powered. After a brutal divorce 3 years ago, I bought this corner house in Pinewood Estates specifically for one thing, that beautiful 3-car garage where I could finally restore my 1967 Camaro in peace. The smell of motor oil mixed with WD-40 and old leather tool belts had become my therapy. After 12-hour shifts running wire through concrete and steel, I'd come home to the familiar crunch of gravel under my work boots, pop a beer, and lose myself tinkering with carburetors and brake systems. This garage wasn't just storage, it was my sanctuary. Hell, I'd already booked a 2-week Hawaii vacation months ago, my first real break in 3 years, and I was planning to come back refreshed and ready to finish that Camaro. Pinewood Estates seemed perfect when I moved in. A quiet community of 180 homes, mostly working folks and retirees who just wanted to cut their grass and live their lives. My neighbor Dolores, a retired teacher with kind eyes and a wicked sense of humor, brought cookies and warned me about the new treasurer who likes rules a little too much. I should have listened. Linda Whitmore became HOA treasurer 18 months ago, and that's when our peaceful neighborhood turned into her personal dictatorship. This woman, mid-40s, drives that pearl-white BMW X5 like it's a weapon, lives in the biggest house with the circular driveway and professional landscaping, transformed community governance into systematic intimidation. She'd patrol the neighborhood in her SUV with the intensity of a border guard, stopping to measure grass height with an actual ruler. The scent of her overpowering floral perfume would linger in the air long after she'd moved on to her next victim. I watched her reduce elderly Mr. Peterson to tears over his bird feeder placement, then fine the young couple on Maple Street, $300 for their kids' sidewalk chalk drawings. Linda created new violation categories like she was getting paid per infraction. Suddenly there were fines for excessive bird feeding, non-approved mailbox colors, and my personal favorite, automotive storage aesthetic violations. That last one was clearly aimed at my garage, where vintage car parts were occasionally visible when I had the door open for ventilation. Her first approach was sugar-sweet manipulation. She'd click across my driveway in her designer heels, expensive coffee cup in manicured hands, voice dripping with fake concern as she suggested I consider the community's visual appeal when working on my car. When friendly suggestions didn't work, she escalated to formal letters on expensive cream letterhead about potential commercial activity because my electrical van was parked in my own driveway overnight. I proved it was residential use only, showed her my electrician's license, work schedules, union paperwork, the whole thing. But Linda wasn't interested in facts. She was interested in control. That's when the daily surveillance drive started. Every evening around 6, here comes the BMW, engine purring like a predator, Linda's blonde head turning to inspect whatever she could find to complain about. The final straw should have been when she called the city inspector, claiming I was running some kind of automotive business. The inspector showed up, took one look around, and told me everything was perfectly legal for residential use. But instead of backing down, Linda doubled down. And 3 days before my long-planned Hawaii vacation, this power-hungry treasurer decided my garage belonged to her. Tuesday night, I dragged myself home from a marathon electrical job downtown. The building's HVAC system had fried half their circuits, and I'd spent 14 hours in a crawl space that smelled like burnt plastic and decades of dust. My steel-toed boots felt like concrete blocks as I trudged up the driveway, already picturing that cold beer waiting in my garage fridge. Instead, I found Linda Whitmore's BMW parked dead center in my workspace, like she was claiming territory. The car's vanilla air freshener was already battling my familiar sense of motor oil and metal shavings. Worse, she'd positioned it perfectly to block access to both my workbench and my Camaro project. Taped to my workbench was a laminated document that made my blood pressure spike. Emergency Protocol #7, Temporary Resource Requisition During Community Crisis. The thing looked official as hell, complete with fake HOA letterhead and Linda's signature as treasurer. According to this masterpiece of bureaucratic fiction, the current crisis was inadequate community meeting facilities requiring alternative space utilization. I called Linda immediately. What crisis, and since when do emergency protocols let you park in my garage? Her voice had that customer service sweetness that screams danger. Garrett, the board is facing unprecedented challenges that require flexible resource management. Surely you understand the importance of community cooperation during difficult times. Move your car, Linda, now. I'll research the specific legal citations and get back to you in writing. The vehicle will be relocated once the emergency passes. The emergency, right? I gave her 48 hours to produce those legal citations and get her BMW out of my garage. To document everything, I installed a security camera aimed at the garage entrance. The steady red light blinked like a digital witness to whatever Linda planned next. Wednesday came and went. Thursday evening, the BMW sat there like it had grown roots. That's when Linda played her ace card. A $200 fine for security violation delivered via certified mail. According to the violation notice, leaving my garage door partially open overnight created a neighborhood safety hazard requiring immediate corrective action. The breakdown was beautiful. $150 base fine plus $50 administrative processing fee. Payment due in 10 days or face additional penalties and potential lien placement. The woman parks illegally in my garage, then fines me because her car prevents the door from closing properly. I had to admire the circular logic even while I fantasized about using my electrical skills to short-circuit her BMW's fancy computer system. That evening, I hit the county courthouse like a man possessed. 3 hours of digging through dusty HOA formation documents taught me something my union buddies had learned the hard way over decades of fighting management. Always read the fine print because bullies count on you not knowing the rules. Turns out, most HOA emergency protocols are completely made up by power-hungry board members with zero legal authority. Real emergency powers need specific language in the original bylaws, board votes with proper notice, and clear time limitations. Linda's protocol #7 appeared exactly nowhere in our community's governing documents. But I found something better. She'd been creating fake protocols for 8 months. Protocol #3 targeted pool usage. Protocol #5 invented landscaping restrictions. Protocol #6 established priority parking for board members. She'd been systematically expanding her imaginary authority, one laminated lie at a time. My neighbor Dolores confirmed my suspicions when she knocked on my door Friday evening, carrying a manila folder thick enough to be a phone book. The retired teacher's instincts had been working overtime. "Thought you might want to see this," she said. "I've been keeping track like I used to document problem students." The folder contained copies of Linda's protocols affecting 12 different households over 18 months. The elderly couple on Pine Street got hammered with $400 in excessive bird-feeding fines. The young family on Maple faced $300 for unapproved children's recreational equipment, their kids' swing set. A disabled veteran received violations for medical equipment storage aesthetic concerns, his wheelchair ramp. Linda had generated over $31,000 in protocol-based fines. None of it appeared in official HOA financial statements. The smell of corruption was stronger than Linda's vanilla air freshener. "She picks one family per month," Dolores explained, settling into my kitchen chair with the practiced patience of a career educator. "Creates a crisis, invents a protocol, collects money. Most people just pay rather than fight because they don't know any better." But here's where Linda made her first real mistake. Monday morning, I confronted her at the community mailboxes. The sound of her heels clicking on asphalt announced her approach like a warning system. She was dressed for battle in a crisp white blazer and those predatory sunglasses that cost more than most people's monthly rent. "Your protocol isn't in the bylaws, Linda. None of them are." Her smile could have flash-frozen coffee. "Emergency situations require flexible leadership, Garrett. The board trusts my judgment in protecting community interests." She paused, examining her manicured nails like they were more interesting than my concerns. "Perhaps you should learn to share the village, peasant." That's when it hit me. Linda Whitmore had zero intention of following any rules except the ones she made up. She thought her treasurer title was a crown, and the rest of us were her subjects. What she didn't realize was that I had something she'd never encountered before. A 2-week Hawaii vacation booked months ago. A union electrician's patience for dealing with corrupt management, and absolutely nothing left to lose. Time to show Linda what happens when peasants stop playing by royalty's rules. Tuesday morning, exactly 24 hours before my flight to Honolulu, I made a decision that would haunt Linda Whitmore for weeks. Standing in my driveway with a cup of coffee that tasted like victory, I looked at her BMW still squatting in my garage like an unwelcome house guest, and grabbed my garage door remote. One button. That's all it took. The mechanical rumble of the door coming down echoed through the neighborhood like thunder. Linda's $60,000 status symbol was now locked inside my private garage, and she was nowhere to be found. Probably at her morning yoga class, practicing downward dog while I practiced upward justice. I spent the rest of the day in peaceful preparation for Hawaii, packing shorts, booking a helicopter tour, downloading podcasts about property rights law. Because if Linda wanted to play games with fake protocols, I was about to get a PhD in how the real legal system works. Linda discovered her predicament around noon. The sound of her pounding on my garage door could probably be heard 3 blocks away, accompanied by muffled shouting that would make a sailor blush. I watched through my kitchen window as she tried every angle, pulling on the door handle, examining the lock mechanism, even attempting to crawl under the 3-inch gap at the bottom. Her designer heels weren't designed for garage door combat. When I finally opened my front door, Linda's carefully constructed composure had cracked like cheap paint. Her blonde hair was disheveled, her white blazer wrinkled, and the smell of desperation mixed with her usual floral perfume created an interesting new fragrance. Eau de karma. "Open this door immediately, Garrett. You have no right to trap my vehicle." I leaned against the doorframe, savoring my coffee. Emergency protocols work both ways, Linda. I'm implementing emergency protocol garage door button in response to the crisis of unauthorized parking. This is theft. This is illegal detention of private property. Funny thing about property rights, I said, pulling out my phone to show her the photos I'd taken. Turns out parking on someone else's private property without permission is called trespassing. But don't worry. I'm sure your emergency protocols cover this situation. The beauty of my position hit me like a warm Hawaiian breeze. Linda needed my cooperation to get her car back, but she'd spent months training me not to cooperate with her demands. She'd created this mess with her own playbook. Over the next few hours, Linda tried every angle she could think of. First, she called a tow truck company. The driver took one look at the situation and shook his head like he was watching someone try to tow the moon. Can't tow a car from inside a closed garage without damaging the door. That's destruction of property, lady. Civil matter between you and the homeowner. Next, she tried a locksmith. He examined the garage door opener and explained that breaking into someone's garage without their permission would be, well, breaking and entering. "You got a court order saying you can access this garage?" he asked. Linda's silence was answer enough. The police visit was my personal favorite. Officer Martinez arrived looking like he'd rather be dealing with actual crimes. Linda launched into a 15-minute explanation about HOA authority and emergency protocols while pointing dramatically at my garage door like it was holding her child hostage. "Ma'am," Officer Martinez interrupted, "why did you park your car in this man's garage without his permission?" Linda's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. The protocols clearly state community resources during emergencies. Is there an emergency right now? Well, no, but... So you parked in his garage without permission, and now you want me to force him to open it? The officer turned to me with the expression of a man who'd seen this exact brand of suburban insanity before. "Sir, is this your private garage on your private property?" "Yes, sir, bought and paid for." "Then you have every right to control access to it." He looked back at Linda. "This is a civil matter, ma'am. If you believe your HOA bylaws give you parking rights, you'll need to resolve that through the courts." After Officer Martinez left, Linda tried her last desperate gambit. She called her insurance company to report the BMW as stolen. I listened from my kitchen as she explained to some poor customer service representative that her car was being held hostage in a residential garage by a hostile homeowner. The insurance rep's response must have been educational because Linda's voice got progressively higher and more strained. something about coverage not applying to vehicles improperly parked on private property without owner consent. The call ended with Linda practically screaming about customer service failures and inadequate policy coverage. What Linda didn't realize yet was that her insurance problem was about to become a lease problem, which was about to become a credit problem, which was about to become a Linda has bigger issues than my garage problem. Wednesday morning, I wheeled my suitcase past Linda's house on the way to my Uber. She was standing at her living room window, still in her bathrobe, watching me leave like a prison guard who'd just realized the keys were locked inside with the inmates. My flight took off at 10:47 a.m. By noon, I was sipping a Mai Tai on Waikiki Beach, posting photos of crystal clear water and perfect white sand on my social media. Meanwhile, back in suburban purgatory, Linda was discovering that her BMW lease company had some very specific requirements about vehicle accessibility for monthly inspections. 2 days into my vacation, Dolores sent me a text that made me laugh so hard I nearly choked on my pineapple. Linda tried to hire someone to cut your power lines. Electrician explained that tampering with someone else's electrical service is a felony. She's not handling this well. By day 4, the voicemail started. Linda's voice cracked with desperation as she begged me to be reasonable and work together to resolve this misunderstanding. She offered to waive the $200 fine, then she offered to pay my HOA dues for 6 months. By day 7, she was offering to personally detail my truck if I just opened the garage door. The transformation was beautiful. In 1 week, Linda Whitmore had gone from community dictator to desperate supplicant, all because she'd never encountered someone who understood that bullies only have power when you acknowledge their authority. I posted another beach photo and ordered another Mai Tai. Paradise had never tasted so sweet. Day 8 in Paradise brought news that made my poolside margarita taste even sweeter. Dolores texted me a photo that belonged in a museum. Linda Whitmore, HOA treasurer extraordinaire, on her hands and knees in my driveway, trying to peer under the garage door like she was searching for her dignity. The community was waking up to Linda's desperation, and they were loving every minute of it. What had started as one woman's power trip was turning into neighborhood entertainment. People were taking their evening walks past my house just to see if Linda would show up for her daily garage vigil. The scent of popcorn from neighboring houses suggested some folks were treating this like dinner theater. But Linda wasn't going down without a fight. Day 9 brought an emergency HOA board meeting that Dolores live-streamed for my viewing pleasure from 3,000 miles away. I watched Linda attempt damage control while sipping coconut water and getting a massage on the beach. The irony of watching a meltdown while someone rubbed tension out of my shoulders was not lost on me. Garrett Hutchins is holding community property hostage, Linda declared to the 7 people who bothered to show up. His garage was designated for emergency use under Protocol #7, and his refusal to cooperate threatens our ability to conduct essential HOA business. Board member Frank Rodriguez, a retired mechanic who'd always seemed suspicious of Linda's protocols, raised his hand. The man had the patient demeanor of someone who'd spent 40 years explaining why you can't fix a transmission with duct tape. Linda, can you show us where Protocol #7 is written in our bylaws? The silence stretched longer than a Hawaiian sunset. Linda shuffled through papers like she was looking for her car keys in a snowstorm. The protocols were developed in response to emerging community needs. Emergency situations require adaptive leadership. That's not what I asked. Is Protocol #7 in our governing documents or not? Frank, surely you understand that rigid adherence to outdated paperwork can prevent effective crisis management. It's a yes or no question, Linda. The meeting devolved from there. Turns out when you can't produce the legal authority for your power grab, people start asking uncomfortable questions, like why Protocol #6 gave Linda priority parking at community events, or why Protocol #5 required landscaping approval from the treasurer specifically, or why none of these protocols had ever been voted on by the board, let alone the community. Frank Rodriguez wasn't done. Linda, I've been looking at our financial statements. We've collected $31,000 in protocol-based fines this year. Where's that money? Another beautiful silence. I could practically hear Linda's brain short-circuiting through the phone screen. The sound of her pen clicking nervously came through clearly, a metronome counting down to her doom. Those funds they're being held in a special account pending resolution of various compliance matters. What special account? I'm the assistant treasurer. I don't know about any special account. That's when Linda made her biggest mistake yet. Instead of admitting she'd been making up protocols and pocketing fines, she doubled down. Some financial matters require discretionary handling by senior board members. Not every transaction needs to be micromanaged by assistant positions. The room temperature dropped 20 degrees. Frank Rodriguez had been assistant treasurer for 6 years and took his oversight responsibilities seriously. Linda had just insulted him in front of witnesses while basically admitting to financial impropriety. "I'm calling for an emergency audit of all HOA finances," Frank announced, effective immediately. Linda's face went white as resort towels. She stammered something about unnecessary disruption and implicit trust, but the damage was done. The other board members, who'd been quietly enabling Linda's protocol scheme, suddenly remembered their fiduciary responsibilities when criminal liability started looking possible. Day 10 brought a voicemail that I saved for posterity. Linda's voice was barely above a whisper. "Garrett, please. The board is asking questions I can't answer. I need to resolve this garage situation before they dig deeper into the finances. I'll personally pay you $500 to open that door. Cash, no questions asked. $500. The same woman who'd fined me $200 for her illegal parking was now offering me $500 to solve her problem. The irony was thicker than Hawaiian humidity. I texted back from my beachside hammock, "Enjoying my vacation. Back next Monday. Happy to discuss your proposal then." Day 11. Linda's lease company left a final notice on her door. Vehicle inspection overdue, monthly payment at risk. Dolores sent me a photo of Linda frantically calling the leasing office while standing in my driveway, gesturing at the closed garage door like she was directing traffic in an alternate universe where cars could fly. Day 12, the BMW's insurance was officially suspended for vehicle inaccessibility. No inspection meant no coverage. No coverage meant Linda was driving illegally, except she couldn't drive because her car was locked in my garage. The circular logic was perfect. By day 13, Linda's morning routine had become a neighborhood attraction. She'd arrive at my garage around 7 a.m. with her coffee and phone, spending an hour trying different combinations on various garage door apps she'd downloaded. Neighbors started timing their dog walks to coincide with Linda's technological failures, and I heard someone was taking bets on which app she'd try next. The smell of desperation was stronger than the tropical flowers in my hotel room. Frank Rodriguez had convinced the board to hire an independent auditor. Linda's special account was about to become very public knowledge. Her BMW was generating late fees faster than a casino slot machine. And somewhere in suburban America, a woman who'd spent 18 months terrorizing her neighbors was learning that gravity applies to everyone, even treasurers. I ordered another Mai Tai and watched the sunset paint the Pacific in shades of justice. 3 more days until I returned to watch Linda's empire finish its spectacular collapse. Day 14 brought the call I'd been waiting for. Frank Rodriguez's voice crackled through my phone while I sat on my hotel balcony watching surfers ride perfect waves. Back home, he'd been riding a different kind of wave, one that was about to crash over Linda Whitmore's head like a financial tsunami. "Garrett, you need to know what we found." Frank's voice carried the grim satisfaction of a mechanic who'd just discovered exactly why your engine was making that noise and why it was about to explode. The auditor finished his preliminary review. Linda's been running a goddamn criminal enterprise using HOA funds. I set down my pineapple juice, the tropical sweetness suddenly tasting like victory. How bad are we talking? $47,000 over 18 months, but it gets worse, much worse. She opened a separate bank account using the HOA's tax ID number, been depositing protocol fines straight into her personal checking. That's bank fraud, identity theft, and embezzlement all rolled into one felony burrito. The magnitude hit me like a rogue wave. Linda hadn't just been power tripping with fake protocols. She'd been running a sophisticated embezzlement operation disguised as community governance. Every manufactured crisis, every authoritarian overreach, every fake emergency had been cover for systematically robbing her neighbors blind. "Frank, there's something else." I pulled up my security camera app, the screen glowing like a treasure map in the Hawaiian twilight. "My garage cameras have been recording Linda's behavior for 2 weeks. You're going to want to see this footage. It's better than Netflix." What I showed Frank was a 2-week documentary of desperation and fraud. The timestamps didn't lie. Linda had been conducting personal real estate business from my garage while claiming HOA emergencies. The footage showed her taking private client calls, using my electrical outlets to charge her devices, even conducting what appeared to be loan application interviews, all while billing the community for essential board meetings. Jesus Christ, Garrett. She's been stealing your electricity, using your property as her satellite office, and charging us for the privilege. Look at this. Frank had been doing his own detective work with the precision of a forensic accountant. The dates of her garage emergency meetings correspond exactly with her real estate appointments. She's been double-dipping, stealing from the HOA and using your garage as her free office space. But the real revelation came when Frank showed me Linda's bank statements, obtained through the legal audit process. The numbers told a story more fictional than any thriller novel. Her legitimate real estate income? Maybe $28,000 last year. But look at her spending. $60,000 BMW lease, $15,000 vacation to Italy, $8,000 in home improvements, designer clothing bills that would make a movie star jealous. This woman has been living like a millionaire on stolen HOA money. The smell of desperation was so thick it could overpower Hawaiian sea breezes. Linda's entire lifestyle was built on theft from the same neighbors she'd been terrorizing with fake fines. The cruel irony was perfect. She'd been stealing from people she was simultaneously bullying with made-up violations. "Garrett, here's what really scares me," Frank continued, his mechanic's instincts picking up on systemic failure patterns. "When embezzlers get caught, they don't usually confess. They try to destroy evidence, blame someone else, or create bigger problems to distract from the original crime. Linda's about to become very dangerous. From my union experience dealing with corrupt contractors and crooked supervisors, I knew Frank was right. Desperate people with nothing left to lose don't go quietly. They take hostages, burn bridges, and try to drag everyone down with them. She needs access to my garage to maintain the illusion that her protocols are legitimate," I realized aloud. "Without that, her whole story falls apart. My locked garage door isn't just trapping her BMW, it's exposing 18 months of criminal activity. The timeline crystallized like sugar in tropical heat. Linda had committed multiple felonies, been living above her means for over a year, and now faced criminal prosecution, financial ruin, and complete social destruction. My simple garage door button had triggered an avalanche she couldn't stop." That evening, as I watched another perfect Hawaiian sunset paint the Pacific in shades of justice, my phone buzzed with an ominous text from Dolores. "Emergency board meeting tomorrow night. Frank's calling for Linda's immediate suspension and criminal referral. Word's getting out about the missing money. She's been driving around the neighborhood all day looking like the Walking Dead. And Garrett? She's been asking neighbors about when you're coming back." I smiled and ordered one last Mai Tai, but the taste was tinged with anticipation rather than pure victory. Tomorrow I'd be flying back to suburban warfare, where a cornered embezzler was about to discover that some peasants know how to fight back against corrupt royalty. The real show was about to begin. The red-eye flight from Honolulu to Dallas gave me 6 hours of uninterrupted planning time. While other passengers slept off their vacation hangovers, I sat in my cramped middle seat with a yellow legal pad, sketching out Linda Whitmore's downfall like an electrician planning a complex wiring job. Every connection had to be perfect. Every circuit had to close, and every switch had to trigger exactly the right consequence at exactly the right moment. My phone buzzed constantly with updates from Frank and Dolores. The emergency board meeting had been a massacre worthy of pay-per-view coverage. Linda tried to control the narrative, claiming the missing $47,000 was temporarily allocated for special community projects pending board approval. When pressed for documentation, she produced a manila folder full of blank forms and half-finished proposals that looked like a sixth grader's last-minute science fair project. Frank Rodriguez wasn't buying what Linda was selling. "Linda, show us one receipt, one invoice. One piece of paper proving this money went to community projects instead of funding your Italian vacation and BMW payments." Linda's response was pure desperation theater. Wild accusations of accounting irregularities, claims that complex financial management required discretionary executive authority, and my personal favorite, threatening to sue the HOA for defamation and coordinated harassment if they continued questioning her fiscal management, because nothing says innocent like threatening to sue your victims. The board voted 6-1 to suspend Linda immediately and refer the matter to law enforcement. The only dissenting vote came from Linda herself, who apparently didn't understand that suspected embezzlers don't get to vote on their own criminal referrals. The irony was thicker than airport coffee. During my layover in Dallas, surrounded by the intoxicating aroma of Cinnabon and desperation, I called my union's legal aid attorney. Years of dealing with contractor fraud had taught me that financial crimes follow predictable patterns, like electrical circuits. Find one short, and you'll usually discover the whole system is compromised. "Garrett, here's what you need to understand," attorney Jennifer Walsh explained, while I sat in an airport Starbucks that smelled like burnt coffee and broken dreams. Embezzlement cases like this are like icebergs. What you see on the surface is usually 10% of the actual crime. If she's stealing HOA money, she's probably filing false tax returns, lying to banks, committing insurance fraud, and God knows what else. The FBI loves cases like this because they're easy to prosecute and make fantastic headlines. Jennifer walked me through something that made my electrician's heart sing: civil asset forfeiture. Every purchase Linda made with stolen HOA funds, her BMW, home improvements, designer clothes, luxury vacations, could potentially be seized and returned to the community. We weren't just looking at getting the money back. We could confiscate the fruits of her 18-month crime spree and auction them off to fund neighborhood improvements. But the legal strategy was only part of my plan. Linda's desperation was about to make her sloppy, and sloppy criminals make mistakes that would make a kindergartner cringe. I needed to be ready to document everything when she finally snapped like an overloaded circuit breaker. The connecting flight home gave me time to coordinate with my neighbors through a group text that had grown to include 47 households. Dolores had organized what she called Operation Garage Watch, a network of retirees with smartphones and nothing but time to document Linda's every move. Mrs. Patterson from Oak Street had professional photography equipment from her late husband's National Geographic days. Mr. Grayson, a retired engineer, understood evidence collection protocols better than most detectives. My security system was already recording everything in high-definition glory, but I wanted multiple angles, multiple witnesses, and documentation so bulletproof it could survive a nuclear audit. Because Linda was going to make a desperate play. Criminals under this much pressure always do. It's like watching someone grab a live electrical wire. You know the shock is coming. Landing at home felt like returning to a neighborhood that had discovered it had superpowers. The normally quiet streets of Pinewood Estates buzzed with an energy I'd never felt before. Neighbors who usually communicated through passive-aggressive HOA violation notices were clustered in groups, sharing information and theories about Linda's crimes like they were planning the D-Day invasion. Dolores met me at my front door carrying a folder thick enough to be used as a weapon. "Welcome home, hero. You missed quite the show. Linda's been calling everyone, claiming you're part of some vast conspiracy against her innocent leadership. She tried to get Mrs. Grayson to sign a petition demanding you open your garage for community harmony. When that failed, she offered to buy Mr. Patterson's house for cash if he'd publicly support her version of events." The desperation was escalating faster than a house fire. Linda was trying to buy allies, manufacture grassroots support, and create alternative narratives. Classic signs of someone whose criminal empire was collapsing in real time and taking her sanity with it. "But wait, there's more," Dolores continued, channeling her inner infomercial announcer. "Frank discovered Linda's professional licensing applications. She's been claiming the HOA treasurer position as executive management experience, with an annual salary of $65,000. The treasurer position is volunteer work, zero salary. She's been lying to state licensing boards to inflate her credentials." Professional licensing fraud, another felony for the growing collection. Linda wasn't just embezzling from neighbors, she was using those crimes to enhance her resume and professional standing. The woman was a one-person crime wave disguised as a community volunteer. That evening, I stood in my driveway looking at my closed garage door while neighbors gathered around like I was hosting an outdoor movie screening. The smell of barbecue smoke from someone's victory dinner mixed with the familiar scent of suburban summer evenings and the sweet aroma of impending justice. After 2 weeks in paradise, it felt surprisingly good to be home, but I could feel eyes watching from Linda's house. Her living room curtains twitched occasionally, and I caught glimpses of her silhouette pacing back and forth like a caged animal planning its escape. Frank had warned me that cornered embezzlers often become desperate enough to try anything. Intimidation, evidence destruction, even violence. My garage remote felt like a weapon of mass destruction in my pocket. One button press would free Linda's BMW and potentially end this standoff. But it would also let her off the hook for 18 months of systematic criminal behavior against people who'd trusted her with their community. Some battles are worth finishing, especially when the outcome benefits everyone except the bully. Monday morning brought Linda Whitmore to my front door at 6:47 a.m., looking like she'd been wrestling with her demons all night and losing badly. The smell of stale coffee and desperation wafted off her like a toxic cloud, mixed with what could only be described as the scent of impending legal doom. Her usually perfect hair was disheveled, her designer blazer wrinkled like she'd slept in it, and her eyes had the wild look of someone who'd been staring at bankruptcy papers until dawn. "We need to talk," she said, her voice cracking like thin ice under pressure. "This has gone too far, Garrett. People are spreading lies about me, making accusations that could destroy my career." I leaned against my door frame, sipping my morning coffee that tasted like victory with a hint of Hawaiian memories. "What lies, Linda? The ones about the missing $47,000 or the ones about you using my garage as your personal office space?" Her composure shattered like safety glass hitting concrete. "Those are accounting discrepancies, temporary allocations. You wouldn't understand the complexity of municipal financial management. Try me. I understand theft pretty well. My union taught me to spot it from miles away." That's when Linda played what she thought was her trump card. She pulled out a legal document that looked official enough to fool someone who'd never seen real paperwork, which, unfortunately for her, didn't include a union electrician who dealt with fake permits and fraudulent contracts. "I've filed an injunction against you for malicious interference with HOA operations. A judge has ordered you to provide immediate access to your garage for essential community business." I took the papers and examined them like I was reading a comic book written by someone who'd learned law from watching TV. The letterhead was wrong, the case number format was complete gibberish, and the signature looked like it had been forged by someone wearing oven mitts while riding a roller coaster. "This is fascinating, Linda. Tell me, which judge signed this masterpiece? Because Judge Martinez retired 6 months ago, and Judge Thompson's signature looks nothing like this artistic interpretation you've created here." Her face went white as garage door paint. The fake court order was criminal forgery, and we both knew it. Linda Whitmore had just committed another felony right on my front porch, while my security cameras recorded everything in glorious high definition for future generations to study. The clerk's office sometimes makes administrative errors. Linda, you just handed me evidence of forgery and attempted fraud, on camera, with witnesses. I gestured to Mrs. Patterson, who was walking her dog at exactly the right moment with a suspiciously large smartphone in her hand, because retired teachers have impeccable timing when it comes to documenting criminal behavior. But Linda wasn't done making things spectacularly worse for herself. That afternoon, she took desperation to new heights by calling Channel 7 News and claiming she was the victim of coordinated harassment by a disgruntled homeowner with criminal connections. Because when you're in a hole, the natural response is to rent heavy equipment and dig faster. The news crew showed up at 4:30 p.m., just as the neighborhood was settling into its evening routine of dinner preparation and Linda watching. Reporter Sarah Grayson looked like she'd rather be covering actual news instead of suburban HOA drama. But Linda had promised an explosive story of community corruption and organized intimidation. What Linda didn't know was that Frank Rodriguez had already contacted the same news station with the real story, complete with financial documents, audit reports, and enough security footage to make a Netflix documentary. When Sarah Grayson arrived, she was locked and loaded with the right questions. "Miss Whitmore, can you explain why $47,000 in HOA funds were deposited into a personal account registered under your name?" Linda's media strategy was about as effective as her forged court order. Those funds were... Mr. Hutchins has been spreading malicious rumors designed to undermine legitimate community leadership. "So you're denying that you embezzled HOA funds?" "I'm denying that I did anything wrong. Garrett Hutchins illegally imprisoned my vehicle and has been conducting a harassment campaign with the support of disgruntled residents who oppose effective governance." The interview lasted 12 minutes and provided enough footage to end Linda's remaining credibility permanently. Watching someone lie on camera while evidence of their crimes was publicly available was like watching a train wreck in slow motion. Horrible, but absolutely impossible to look away from. But Linda's final desperate gambit came that evening, like the grand finale of a fireworks show organized by someone who'd never heard of safety regulations. Around 9 p.m., she arrived at my house with 3 men I didn't recognize, all wearing work clothes and carrying tools. The smell of cheap beer and poor life choices suggested they'd been recruited from whatever bar still served people willing to commit crimes for gas money. "I'm authorizing emergency access to retrieve HOA property," Linda announced loudly enough for the entire neighborhood to hear. "These contractors will remove the obstruction preventing legitimate community business." What Linda didn't realize was that Operation Garage Watch had evolved into a neighborhood alert system that would have impressed the Pentagon. Within 5 minutes, my driveway was surrounded by 23 residents with smartphones, Mrs. Patterson with her professional camera equipment, and Mr. Grayson with a video camera that could have been used for documentary filming. The contractors took one look at the crowd and started backing toward their truck like they'd just realized they'd walked into a police convention. Smart men who'd learned through hard experience that some jobs aren't worth the legal liability. "Ma'am," the apparent leader said to Linda, his voice carrying the wisdom of someone who'd made questionable decisions before, "this doesn't look like a legitimate work order. These folks seem to think you don't have authority to be here." Frank Rodriguez stepped out of the crowd carrying a folder of legal documents thick enough to use as a weapon. "That's because she doesn't. Linda Whitmore has been suspended from the HOA board pending criminal investigation for embezzlement. She has no more authority to authorize work than my neighbor's cat." The contractors were gone within 60 seconds, leaving Linda standing alone in my driveway surrounded by neighbors who'd been documenting her crime spree in real time. The woman who'd terrorized this community for 18 months now faced a circle of people with smartphones and legal evidence of her systematic fraud. That's when Linda Whitmore finally snapped completely like an overloaded electrical circuit in a thunderstorm. "You think you've won?" she screamed at me while cameras rolled. "I'll destroy this community before I let peasants like you ruin me. I know things about every one of you. I have records. I have photos. I have enough dirt to bury this entire neighborhood." And there it was, Linda's final confession, recorded by multiple witnesses, broadcast live on social media, and documented for posterity. She'd just admitted to conducting surveillance on her neighbors and threatened to use illegally obtained information for blackmail and intimidation. The smell of her desperation was so thick it could overpower a landfill on a hot summer day. Linda Whitmore had just confessed to multiple felonies while surrounded by evidence and witnesses. Her criminal empire hadn't just collapsed. It had exploded in her face like a faulty electrical circuit connected to a nuclear reactor. Tomorrow would bring consequences she couldn't imagine. Tonight, I'd sleep peacefully, knowing that justice was about to be served with a very large side of karma. Tuesday morning arrived with the subtlety of a SWAT raid. At 7:23 a.m., 3 police cruisers pulled into Pinewood Estates like they were responding to a hostage situation. Turns out, Linda's surveillance confession and forged court order had triggered a criminal investigation that moved faster than her BMW lease payments. Detective Ray Morrison knocked on my door while Linda watched from her living room window like a prisoner watching her execution being prepared. The smell of fresh coffee and impending justice filled my kitchen as I showed Detective Morrison 2 weeks' worth of security footage, documenting Linda's criminal behavior in high-definition detail. "Mr. Hutchins, I've been investigating financial crimes for 15 years, and I've never seen someone document their own criminal activity this thoroughly," Detective Morrison said, shaking his head like he was watching someone repeatedly touch a hot stove. "She's committed forgery, attempted fraud, embezzlement, threatening behavior, and possibly stalking, all while being recorded by multiple cameras." But Linda wasn't going down without a fight. By 10 a.m., she'd hired the most expensive criminal defense attorney in the county, a sharp-dressed shark named Marcus Webb, who specialized in getting wealthy criminals reduced sentences. The man arrived in a Mercedes that cost more than most people's houses, wearing a suit that could fund a small country's defense budget. Webb's strategy was as predictable as Linda's monthly violation notices: blame everyone else. He held an impromptu press conference on Linda's front lawn, claiming she was the victim of community harassment orchestrated by a disgruntled homeowner with anti-authority tendencies. "My client has been subjected to a coordinated campaign of intimidation and defamation," Webb announced to the 3 reporters who'd showed up, probably hoping for something more exciting than suburban HOA drama. "Mr. Hutchins has deliberately created this crisis to damage my client's reputation and professional standing." The mini-twist came when Webb tried to turn Linda into a sympathetic figure by claiming the missing $47,000 was a bookkeeping error caused by outdated HOA accounting software. According to Webb's creative interpretation of reality, Linda had been trying to modernize the community's financial systems and had been unfairly targeted for her innovative approach to fiscal management. Frank Rodriguez was watching the press conference from my living room, and his laughter could probably be heard in the next county. Innovative approach? She stole money and put it in her personal checking account. That's not innovation. That's the oldest crime in the book. But Webb wasn't finished rewriting history. He announced that Linda would be filing a counter lawsuit against me for false imprisonment, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and conspiracy to defame a public servant. The amount, $150,000 in damages for the trauma I'd allegedly caused by locking her BMW in my garage. The audacity was breathtaking. Linda was suing me for traumatizing her by preventing her from continuing to commit crimes on my property. It was like a bank robber suing the bank for emotional distress caused by their security cameras. That afternoon brought a development that made the morning's excitement look like a warm-up act. The FBI showed up at Linda's house with enough agents to invade a small country, carrying boxes and wearing expressions that suggested this was serious federal business. Turns out, Linda's crimes had crossed state lines when she used her fake HOA credentials to obtain credit in neighboring states. The BMW lease, her mortgage applications, even her professional license renewals, all had been enhanced with fraudulent income claims based on her imaginary HOA salary. What started as local embezzlement had become federal fraud. Agent Sarah Collins, a no-nonsense investigator who looked like she could intimidate a hardened criminal just by adjusting her sunglasses, explained the scope while standing in my driveway. Miss Whitmore has been running a sophisticated fraud operation for over 3 years. The HOA theft was just the tip of the iceberg. She's been filing false tax returns, lying to financial institutions, and using forged documents to enhance her creditworthiness across multiple states. The neighborhood had turned into a crime scene from a Hollywood movie. FBI agents carried out computers, boxes of documents, and even Linda's designer furniture. Neighbors gathered on the streets like they were watching the world's most expensive garage sale, except everything was evidence of federal crimes. Linda's meltdown was visible from space. She stood in her doorway screaming about government overreach and constitutional violations, while agents systematically dismantled 18 months of criminal evidence. The woman who'd spent years terrorizing neighbors with fake violations was now facing real federal charges that could land her in prison for decades. But the real entertainment came when the asset forfeiture team arrived. Federal law allows the government to seize anything purchased with proceeds from criminal activity, and Linda had been very generous with her stolen money. The BMW got loaded onto a federal trailer. Her jewelry collection disappeared into evidence bags. Even her professional photography equipment, apparently purchased for conducting surveillance on neighbors, was cataloged and confiscated. By evening, Linda Whitmore's house looked like it had been hit by a federal hurricane. Empty rooms, government seals on doors, and a for sale sign that appeared with supernatural speed. The woman who'd ruled Pinewood Estates like a petty dictator was now facing the kind of legal consequences that would make most criminals consider career changes. Detective Morrison stopped by my house around 6 p.m. with an update that made my victory coffee taste even sweeter. Mr. Hutchins, we've recovered evidence of Linda conducting surveillance on 43 households in your community. Hidden cameras, financial background checks, even social media monitoring. She's been building files on her neighbors for potential blackmail and intimidation purposes. The scope was staggering. Linda hadn't just been embezzling money. She'd been running a comprehensive surveillance operation against people who trusted her with their community governance. Every protocol violation, every arbitrary fine, every manufactured crisis had been supported by illegally obtained personal information about her victims. That night, I stood in my garage for the first time in 2 weeks, breathing in the familiar smell of motor oil and justice served cold. My Camaro restoration project waited patiently where I'd left it, covered in a thin layer of dust that would be easy to clean. Linda's BMW was gone, towed away by federal agents to be auctioned off for victim restitution. Her criminal empire had been dismantled by professionals who specialized in making wealthy criminals face consequences for their actions. Tomorrow would bring the final chapter in Linda Whitmore's spectacular fall from community dictator to federal prisoner. Tonight, I'd sleep peacefully in a neighborhood that was finally free from tyranny, surrounded by neighbors who'd learned they didn't have to accept abuse from people with imaginary authority. Sometimes the best revenge is just pressing a button and letting criminals destroy themselves. The federal courthouse steps looked like a scene from a movie about justice, if movies about justice involved this many news vans and angry neighbors with homemade signs. Word had spread beyond Pinewood Estates that Linda Whitmore's sentencing hearing was happening today, and it seemed like half the county had shown up to witness the end of suburban tyranny. I arrived at 9 a.m. to find the courthouse surrounded by a carnival of vindication. Local news crews had set up a broadcasting base camp. National HOA reform advocates had flown in with professionally printed banners reading "Democracy dies in driveways" and "Audit your HOA before they audit you." Even some guy with a food truck was selling justice burgers and accountability tacos to the growing crowd. The smell of morning coffee mixed with righteous indignation and the faint aroma of Linda's remaining dignity going up in smoke. This wasn't just a sentencing hearing, it was a community celebration of bureaucratic bullies getting their comeuppance. Frank Rodriguez had organized a caravan of 47 residents to attend the hearing. They wore matching t-shirts that read Pinewood Estates, where fake protocols go to die on the front, and Garrett's Garage, symbol of property rights, on the back. Dolores had designed them because retired teachers understand the power of visual messaging. Inside the courthouse, the scene was even more dramatic. Federal Judge Patricia Williams presided over a courtroom packed tighter than a Las Vegas show. Linda sat at the defendant's table looking like she'd aged a decade in 6 months, wearing an orange jumpsuit that clashed horribly with her remaining blonde highlights. Her expensive attorney, Marcus Webb, looked like he'd rather be representing anyone else in America. The prosecution had prepared a presentation that would have made Hollywood directors jealous. Federal prosecutor David Grayson methodically laid out 18 months of Linda's criminal enterprise using PowerPoint slides, security footage, and financial evidence that painted a picture of systematic fraud that would impress organized crime bosses. Your Honor, the defendant operated what can only be described as a criminal organization disguised as community governance, Prosecutor Grayson announced to the packed courtroom. She created fake protocols to generate illegal revenue, conducted surveillance operations against her neighbors, forged legal documents, and embezzled funds from families who trusted her with their community's financial security. Then came the victim impact statements. Judge Williams had allowed every affected household to speak, and they lined up like voters on Election Day. Mrs. Patterson took the microphone first, her voice carrying the moral authority of someone who'd survived the Great Depression and Linda Whitmore's reign of terror. Your Honor, I'm 83 years old, and I've never been afraid of my neighbors until Linda Whitmore moved in. She made me terrified to plant flowers in my own yard, afraid that she'd find some rule I'd violated and fine me money I don't have. The testimony continued for 2 hours. Elderly residents who'd been terrorized with fake fines, young families who'd been threatened with liens for children's toys, disabled veterans who'd been harassed about medical equipment. The pattern was clear. Linda had systematically targeted the most vulnerable residents for her criminal schemes. Frank Rodriguez's testimony was the technical knockout. Your Honor, as Assistant Treasurer, I watched Linda Whitmore transform our peaceful community into her personal ATM. She didn't just steal money. She stole our sense of security, our trust in democratic governance, and our basic right to live peacefully in our own homes. But the real drama came when the prosecution played Linda's surveillance recordings. Federal investigators had recovered audio and video files showing Linda documenting private conversations, photographing residents through windows, and even recording children playing in their own yards. The courtroom gasps sounded like a horror movie audience discovering the killer's identity. Judge Williams looked like she was personally offended by Linda's crimes. Miss Whitmore, in 30 years on the bench, I've rarely encountered such a systematic abuse of trust and authority. You didn't just embezzle money. You terrorized an entire community while masquerading as a public servant. Linda's attorney attempted a last-minute plea for mercy, claiming his client was overwhelmed by the responsibilities of community leadership and had made accounting errors under pressure. Judge Williams wasn't buying what he was selling. Mr. Webb, your client didn't make accounting errors. She operated a criminal enterprise that would make organized crime figures envious. The evidence shows deliberate, systematic, and predatory behavior targeting vulnerable residents. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for. Judge Williams looked directly at Linda and delivered the sentence that would echo through HOA reform circles for years. Miss Whitmore, you are sentenced to 5 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised probation. You are ordered to pay full restitution of $74,000 to affected residents, and you are permanently banned from serving in any HOA capacity anywhere in the United States. The courtroom erupted like a championship game had just ended. Neighbors hugged, reporters scribbled frantically, and someone in the back started a chant of "Justice! Justice!" that Judge Williams had to gavel down. Outside the courthouse, reporters surrounded me like I was a celebrity instead of a guy who'd just pressed a garage door button at exactly the right moment. The questions came fast. How does it feel to take down a corrupt HOA official? What advice do you have for other homeowners facing similar abuse? Would you do it again? My answer became the soundbite that played on news channels across the country. Linda Whitmore thought her title gave her power over other people's property and lives. Today she learned that in America, bullies eventually face consequences. Property rights still matter, and sometimes the best way to fight corruption is just to refuse to be intimidated by people who think rules don't apply to them. The mic drop moment was complete. Linda Whitmore, suburban dictator and federal criminal, was heading to prison. Pinewood Estates was finally free. 6 months after Linda Whitmore traded her designer blazer for federal prison stripes, Pinewood Estates had transformed from a community ruled by fear into something that actually resembled the peaceful neighborhood I'd originally wanted. The smell of fresh-cut grass and barbecue smoke had replaced the lingering scent of corruption and intimidation that had hung over our streets like a toxic cloud. The new HOA board, elected in a landslide victory for democracy over dictatorship, implemented changes that would have made Linda's power-grabbing heart explode. Frank Rodriguez became president with a mandate for transparency that included monthly financial reports published online, open board meetings live-streamed for residents who couldn't attend, and a revolutionary concept: actually following the community's original bylaws instead of making up new rules every month. Dolores took over as secretary and immediately instituted what she called the Linda Prevention Protocol, a system requiring board approval for any expenditure over $50, mandatory financial audits every 6 months, and a rule that no single board member could create policies without community input. The woman had learned from 40 years of teaching that prevention was worth a pound of criminal prosecution. The financial recovery exceeded everyone's expectations. Federal asset forfeiture had returned $74,000 to affected residents, plus Linda's house sold at auction for enough money to fund community improvements that actually benefited everyone instead of just the treasurer's bank account. The new community center, built where Linda's surveillance command post used to operate, featured a plaque reading, "Dedicated to democratic governance and property rights. May bullies never again find welcome here." My garage had become a neighborhood legend. Parents brought their kids by to see the Freedom Garage, where one man's refusal to be intimidated had triggered a federal investigation that exposed systematic corruption. I'd installed a small memorial plaque next to the garage door opener. Here stood Linda's BMW, symbol of corruption defeated by property rights and perfect timing. The classic car restoration project that Linda had tried to shut down became a community teaching workshop. Every Saturday morning, neighbors gathered in my garage to learn basic automotive maintenance while I worked on the Camaro. The smell of motor oil and shared knowledge had replaced Linda's vanilla air freshener and toxic authority. Kids learned to change oil, elderly residents discovered they could maintain their own vehicles, and the garage became what it was always meant to be, a place where people came together to build things instead of tearing each other down. Legal precedent from Linda's case rippled across the country like waves from a boulder dropped in still water. Property rights attorneys used the federal conviction to defend homeowners facing similar HOA abuse in 12 states. The Pinewood precedent established that HOA board members who exceed their legal authority face personal liability for their crimes, and no title or position protects criminals from prosecution for theft and fraud. 3 months after sentencing, Congress passed the HOA Transparency Act, requiring annual financial audits for communities managing more than $50,000 in resident fees. The legislation, nicknamed Linda's Law by property rights advocates, mandated criminal background checks for board members and established federal penalties for embezzlement from homeowner associations. Sometimes one person's spectacular criminal stupidity can inspire nationwide reform. My daughter Emma, who'd been visiting monthly since the garage incident, decided to move back permanently after seeing how a community could transform when people stood up to bullies together. She took a job with the county prosecutor's office specializing in HOA financial crimes, because Linda's case had inspired a new generation of legal professionals to protect communities from predatory board members. The Hawaii vacation that had started this whole beautiful mess became an annual tradition, but now it was a celebration rather than an escape. This year, the entire new HOA board joined me for a week in paradise, funded by surplus money that previous boards had claimed didn't exist. The irony was perfect. Linda's theft had been so systematic that honest accounting revealed enough savings to fund community vacations for everyone. Professional recognition followed the legal victory like applause after a perfect performance. The National Property Rights Foundation named me Homeowner Hero of the Year for demonstrating that individual citizens could successfully resist bureaucratic abuse through legal channels. The award came with a $5,000 grant for community beautification, which we used to plant trees where Linda's surveillance cameras used to monitor innocent neighbors. The Pinewood Estates Community Garden, established where Linda's house once stood, became a symbol of growth from the ashes of corruption. Every spring, residents plant vegetables and flowers in soil that had been cleansed of toxic leadership. The harvest feeds elderly residents and funds scholarships for local students pursuing careers in public service, the kind that actually serves the public instead of enriching those in power. Linda's prison letters, forwarded by the Federal Bureau of Prisons, provided ongoing entertainment for residents who'd survived her reign of terror. She continued claiming innocence while serving her sentence, insisting that she'd been railroaded by a conspiracy of ungrateful residents who didn't appreciate effective leadership. The delusion was complete and apparently permanent. But the real victory wasn't Linda's imprisonment, or the recovered money, or even the federal legislation inspired by her crimes. The real victory was walking through a neighborhood where children played without fear of violation notices, where elderly residents tended their gardens without worrying about arbitrary fines, and where democracy had replaced dictatorship through the simple act of people standing together against a bully. 2 weeks ago, I received the ultimate validation. A new family moving into Linda's former house asked if I was the garage guy who took down the corrupt HOA lady. When I confirmed my identity, the husband shook my hand and said, "Thank you for making this a place where normal people can live in peace." That evening, I stood in my garage working on the Camaro's engine while neighbors' kids played in the street without fear and the smell of dinner cooking wafted through the community. The garage door was open, my tools were organized exactly how I wanted them, and the BMW that had started this whole beautiful mess was probably being driven by some federal employee who'd bought it at auction. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting mad, it's pressing a button at exactly the right moment and watching bullies destroy themselves while you're sipping Mai Tais in paradise. Share your HOA nightmare story in the comments. Because Linda's surveillance system investigation revealed corruption runs deeper than any of us imagined, and your community might be next. Hit subscribe and ring that bell. Next week we're exposing the hidden network of HOA officials who've been sharing blackmail tactics and embezzlement strategies across 17 states. Trust me, you won't believe how organized this corruption really is.